Good morning, YouTubers. It's Monday around 10:20. Hope everyone's doing good. It's a nice sort of rainy day. The sun is starting to come out now. You can see some blue skies. But yeah, fall is officially here. And yeah, hope everyone's doing good. So yeah, we have some stuff to get into. There's a movie I recently went up to Blue Moose a few times. I actually went to Blue Moose a few times over the last month. It's really nice. I had a little bit of extra cash, and I had a couple of gift certificates. So yeah, I kind of went a little crazy, and it's been amazing. Got a bunch of new movies that I got, and I've been watching them, making my way through them. So look look forward to a whole bunch of new reviews coming up this week. So many cool movies, some that I've seen, some that I haven't seen. Probably most of them I probably have seen once or twice, but this was back in the days of the VHS era. I remember when I was a kid, and I grew up in New York, in Rockland County, New York, and there was, like I've said before, like I grew up at the very tail end of Beta, and Beta was, from my earliest memory, that was the first time I saw, outside of television, something where there was a tape and you could actually record onto this machine and then watch them. And also the beta tapes were like tiny. They were kind of like I always think of beta as being almost like the equivalent to like the 8 track. They were really bad quality, but you could tape over them, and you could tape stuff off of TV, and you could like duplicate movies. But my earliest recollection was my dad had one of those players, and there was a store that had just closed that had beta tapes. So I remember watching those as a kid, and then within a year or so of that, VHS had just come out, and there was a video store about, I don't know, 5 miles or so from my house, and I remember we would go there as a family. Me, my mom, and my dad, and we would go there and rent tapes, VHS tapes, and it was such a cool thing, because some movies I remember seeing that were on cable at the time, movies that I've covered, like say The Tourist Trap, or um, House by the Cemetery, the Hammer films, Christopher was starring Christopher Lee. Those are movies that I remember seeing on cable at the time, and those were like the first few kind of horror movies that I saw. And suddenly, as a kid, going to a store, and I was real little, but going to a video store and seeing those titles where you could rent them, and the thing that was so mesmerizing was like going to like the horror section as a kid and seeing all the artwork laid out, and that was like such a cool time, and that's what made me that's what started the fire for me as far as being a huge fan of horror, science fiction. And so the movies, like I said, I just went on this little shopping frenzy. Some of the movies that I got, I haven't seen, and some I had seen when I was a kid, like, through a VHS rental or on cable. But it's virtually like seeing them all for the first time, and also, seeing them in this, really amazing quality of like it being on Blu-ray. So it's really just an awesome experience, and super fun. So yeah, and but before I talk about the movie and some more movie stuff. So yesterday we had a quantum show in Rockland, and we were supposed to play our last show at Lulu's, which was, a really great it's our favorite venue for Quantum, and we've played there a lot this summer. We've also played there a lot with our jazz group, the Whitehead Dean group, and both bands had a pretty nice residency there all summer. And we had our last jazz gig with the Whitehead Dean group a couple weeks ago, and it was on I think it was on a Saturday. And with Quantum, we've also done both. Well, the jazz group and Quantum, we mostly always most of the gigs have always been on Sundays. We did a few where we did a few like on off days. Quantum did a few like I think we did one or two Fridays and then maybe like a Wednesday. So we kind of switched up a couple of days, but primarily both of those bands were playing on Sundays. So we had our last jazz gig about a couple weeks ago, and the reason is because we're outside and it's legitimately starting to get cold outside right now. So it's kind of marked the end of the season. And then yesterday we were supposed to have our last Quantum gig, but unfortunately my about an hour. Well, I should say like we started about 3 o'clock, and obviously I got the sense it was a little chilly out, and people are not it's not the time right now I guess for people to eat ice cream, so it was pretty mellow. There wasn't really anybody there, but we started playing, and then the second or third song I noticed my equipment was acting up, meaning like as I basically have like really I have a real small setup for the most part. I mostly use Korg. Korg is like my favorite company as far as when it comes to keyboards and drum machines. I've used a lot of different things, experimented with a lot of different things, but I have like over the years I've messed around. Like I have an SPDS drum machine, which is an older drum machine from the '80s, and those are really really popular now. They've kind of come back. They've reissued them. They've beefed up what their capabilities are. They're really great for like live performance and studio. You can you can basically do you know pre-production stuff and basically on a card and load it up on from your computer and load it into your SPDS drum machine. It's really versatile. It's pretty amazing. I have one, but it's wicked old. It's from that era. It's from like the probably the late '80s, early '90s probably. But it's wicked old, and I've used that a lot. It's super fun. I've used it a lot for Quantum. I haven't actually used that drum machine for a while. I mean, we had a few of our songs that we've recorded with that band, particularly with our last album, the second to last album, The Stars Beneath Our Feet. A couple of those songs, and especially one song, um, really was, I used that drum machine for that song. And that was this Latin tune called Latin Cuisine, like a Latin-y kind of electronica sounding tune. And there's like a lot of percussion kind of stuff in it. So I used to use that all the time, and we used to play that song all the time. That song always seemed to be like a real popular song. People always seem to really like that song a lot. But we since then, and it's been a few years since I've used that, since we've performed that song, and eventually I'll bring it back. But we've been just kind of I've been preoccupied with like all this other new material that I have and trying to get that stronger, and we've been playing that stuff out, the newer tunes. So I haven't really used the that machine in a long time, but I usually use that. I always use my microKORG, which is the keyboard, and then I have a Chaosilator Pro, and Chaosilator Pro is basically a drum machine. And the first time I ever messed around with those drum machines, I also had when I was in my 20s and 30s. I had an Alesis, I think it's called an Alesis 5000, and it was a drum machine that was used in like It came out like in the 80s, and it was one of the first drum machines where you could kind of cut up and mix loops of like presets. Presets are drum grooves. Like it could be like, say, a generic Latin groove or a generic rock groove or a generic funk groove, but you it has these presets, and you can like loop them, and then you can kind of edit them together and and put some effects on them. And but it's like pretty bare minimalist. You're pretty limited to what you can't do. It doesn't have other capabilities as far as looping live stuff into it or loading up a card and sticking it into it. And some of the beats and stuff are cheesy. I love the cheese. I'm all about the cheese, but kind of cheesy in a way that it doesn't really sound that great. I mean, it can, but it's not that great. It's great for constructing ideas and those kinds of things. But so fast forward quite a few years, I played I played in two bands before Quantum, and one being Full Contact Kitty. And I had always loved electronic music back then, and that was primarily like an kind of an indie rock band, and very much influenced by like stuff like Velvet Underground or like the Pixies and things like that, and Sonic Youth especially. But we were all fans of electronic music, like groups like Massive Attack was a huge influence. Still one of my all-time favorite groups. So I remember buying a Korg for that band, and I used that, and that was our first kind of foray into experimenting with rock mixed in with electronics. So I used to play the micro Korg in that band, and I used to play mostly drum set, but I would use the Korg for like effects and certain kinds of tunes that we would have. They'd have intros or so that was like the first time I ever like ventured into trying to play electronic music, and and then years later, the next band I was in called which was called Tit City. That was about 90. That was the other thing of where that band kind of moved into where it was pretty much a full on electronic group. It still had other elements of punk rock and rock and live instruments, but it was all electronic. And that was kind of the next level as far as diving into electronics, trying to do that stuff, say live, and then also like in a rehearsal mode, and then eventually some recording. And I used the Korg for that band also, but that band got more expansive and more intense as far as diving into that kind of aesthetic or that world where we were playing with big drum loops, and I was playing essentially with like these drum tracks that were live, and essentially like a click track. So I was like learning how to play along with loops, meaning that you know where you have these presets or you have these drum grooves that are recorded either beforehand or after or during or in the moment, and the BPMs, everything is set because it's a machine. So how I had to learn how to play along with these loops live, and it was really tough. It was really hard at first, and in order for me to kind of get more comfortable with that, I got this uh, uh, K oscillator, and a K oscillator is basically like a little mini drum machine that's really great. And basically, you could loop. It gave you a whole bunch of presets, drum machine sounds, drum grooves, and keyboard sounds and samples, and you basically can loop these tracks and kind of create your own little mishmash of songs. And basically, what I would do when I was in Tit City, practice wise, I had a little amp, and I would loop these beats and have it running through an amp and headphones, and I would just practice with these playing along with these drum grooves, trying to get more and more confident and solid with playing with live loops like in a live setting. And it was a lot of work, and I spent a lot of time doing that, but that was the first time I kind of actively used the drum machine more and more. we never used it live, and then eventually years later, when that band was the time of that band was over, and I started Quantum, I was still messing around with like the Korg and the Chaosilator, but I realized the Chaosilator was good. I've used it for studio stuff. I've used it for uh, quite a few recordings. I used it for this rock album I did. That was the first album we did on Berenice Records. I used bits and pieces of that drum machine, and I would cut them up and put effects on them, and we would do that kind of stuff in the studio, and it was great. And we used some of that. We did use that drum machine a little bit live because it had some really great effects, and it's a great machine, and it's super small. It's like you can put it in your pocket. And but when I started Quantum, I that's all I had, and I was the drum machine itself isn't. I don't really feel like as far as it being a featured thing to create grooves or beats for live and especially studio. Like if that's your bass, it wasn't really strong enough, and it didn't have a lot of capability. Like one of the things about it is if like you looped, it's a loop station, so you can basically loop multiple tracks on it as you go. But with that drum machine, because of the limited capability, you could you might loop something that has four parts, and by that point, it will start like kind of maxing out, and it will start distorting. And it wasn't really, super compatible with the Korg. It wasn't, and it wasn't. So eventually, I came across the Chaosilator Pro, which was basically the mother of this little guy, and then I got that, and then that was really cool because you could loop lots of tracks, and you could do it to an almost an endless amount, and it had all of these other presets for keyboards, and it had MIDI capabilities, meaning that you could plug in the Korg and various other keyboards, but especially Korg because it was also the drum machine was also made by Korg, and you could plug both of those together, and you could loop both of those things together. And it had an external mic, so you could like record live stuff, on the fly. Like if you wanted to record live vocals or percussion or drums, you could do that also. And it had a pretty unlimited amount as far as like you could build the tracks more and more. And it also had an SD card thing, so you could load things into it. And it had an effects rack too, that or an effects rack bank that you could basically, take any of the presets that are in there and kind of make them a little bit more a little bit more customized, or like you could have fun with it and kind of edit the stuff and put your own personality to them and run them through these different effects. So it had a lot of capabilities. And then eventually I got the Chaosilator Pro Plus, which was that but even bigger, and it was like the big daddy of the whole family. And that had twice the amount of capability, the quite twice the amount of storage, and all these things. But so back about 5 or 6 years ago, well, we started the band about 6 years ago or so now, almost 7 years ago. It's hard to believe. But we were, playing a lot, and I was practicing a lot. At one point, work on by, using that equipment all the time at home. And when we started playing gigs, we were playing a lot of gigs for a while, and I remember one gig after I had the equipment for a few years. We were playing this one gig where we used to always play, which has always been one of my favorite gigs. I love doing it. We would always do it in August, and we would play at the amphitheater in Camden. And this was a few years back. And we played this one gig. It was a really, really hot day, and suddenly my drum machine started fritzing out, and it was like not letting me loop things. I couldn't edit things. I couldn't. It would kind of like start playing these beats in the settings that I wasn't even really touching. I couldn't shut anything off. And at first, I thought it was the humidity because I remember that day was a really, really hot summer day, and I thought maybe my equipment was overheating. So I unplugged everything, and then it got to the point where we couldn't even play, and we basically, played we had I think a 2 hour set, and we only played for like 45 minutes. So, and it was pretty stressful and aggravating, and I didn't know what was going on because it was the first time I had these problems. So everything was fritzing out. The drum machine was, it was all pertaining to the drum machine. So, and at that point, that band, we were really busy, and we started going on the road and doing these little mini tours, and we would play down, and we started playing. There was a time when we were playing a lot of gigs. Like, we would play a lot of local gigs with Quantum, and then we started playing a lot in New York, and then we would play down in New Hampshire. We played in Connecticut, and we eventually played gigs in Montreal and in Canada, and then we were playing shows in Vermont. And it was cool because we were like, going on these little road trips, and we would do it a lot of times by ourselves. And then there was another band that we were playing with for a while, and we would do the shows together, Darren Diaz side. And it was a fun adventure. I mean, it was a great time. I really, enjoyed some of the shows that we played in New York. We haven't done that in a while. But during this time when I was having this problem with the drum machine, we had a bunch of gigs booked, and we were going on the road, and we had some shows in Vermont, I think, that day. So I was a little bit, I had anxiety about my equipment, obviously not working. And I remember we went to Vermont, and then the drum machine just totally died. We got up, we played at this pretty cool club. I think it was called Nectar's in Vermont. And Vermont's a really cool state. The city was really cool. We got we kind of got in a bad spot there just because I think we were put in these clubs. I got these gigs at these clubs that were really not. I thought they would be a little bit more open to electronic music. We had a couple of shows in Vermont, and I remember the one time we played there, the first time was not so great, and eventually we went back there, and it was actually a lot better. And we had a pretty good response, and the show went pretty well. But our first time was when this happened with my equipment, and we went there, and my equipment just totally died. My drum machine totally died, and we couldn't even play, and it was a disaster. So I didn't have any backup equipment. And I came to the conclusion what had happened was basically the brain of the machine had fried, totally fried. So I ended up I had a warranty set up with the company. So I was able to get another one for free. And then I eventually got two drum machines, and I got them under this warranty, so it was really nice because they're about $400. The Castellator Pro is about $400. And then so ever since then we were golden. And then I my equipment always has a weird thing sometimes where it because I use it a lot, and I push it to its max into its capacity because I loop a lot of stuff, and then I work on this stuff all the time at home. And then this summer, we've been playing a lot, and I kind of really probably to a degree overused the machines. Like, I kind of put them put the fire onto them as far as maxing things out. And so what happened yesterday, basically what happened, the drum machine fried, totally fried. And ever since that episode that had happened years ago, when we played a couple of shows, and then we were on the road, and it was kind of a disaster. I always started getting in the habit of bringing my backup because I have two Korgs, two keyboards, and I have two drum machines. So I got in the habit of any gig that we were playing, I would always bring my backup stuff in case something shit the bed. But we played a lot this summer, and I had no problems with my equipment. Things were going really well, and we played some gigs where we were outside and it was really hot, and it kind of pushed the limits as far as using it. And but again, I used it a lot, didn't have any problems. And then I noticed a couple of weeks ago I was home practicing, and I noticed it was acting weird. And then but then it was okay. And anyway, so we got to our gig, and then the last two gigs that that we've been doing, the last two or three shows, I felt pretty confident with the equipment. Not, the equipment, it was working great. So I stopped bringing my backups equipment. So yesterday when that happened, I didn't have my backup stuff. So I was there for about 35 minutes trying to figure out what was wrong and trying to fix the problems. I took all the knobs off. I was unplugging. I tried a couple of different settings, sprayed a bunch of WD-40, and so, and it never really worked. It worked for a little while, but the thing basically fried. If I had my backup drum machine, it would have been fine. We could have played. So so what I'm going to do is, obviously I have this other machine, so I can use that, and so I'll be doing that, and then I'm going to probably have to I'm going to order another one because I need it. So just in case, but that's the thing with technology. I think it's a newer model, and I find they don't in a lot of ways they don't make them to last as long. But granted, I kind of you know I kind of abuse the machine so much in ways because I use it a lot. So I push it to its max. So you know I so I fried it. So but that being said, I'll be getting another drum machine. I have a backup one, which leads me to say that we have a show this Saturday, which knock on wood should be good and no equipment will hopefully fail. But uh, we did a show at Ada's last weekend, and that was, or the weekend before last, and that was really great. And we're going to be doing kind of the same thing, but a little bit more loose and informal. And we're not going to have like it mapped out as far as like everybody's got to play a certain time or play a certain kind of music or play a certain way. Meaning like when we played at Ada's, we had Method for Madness who opened up the show. Spencer Roulard, he opened up, and Ada's wanted us to like kind of watch the volume in the beginning, and maybe because there was a lot of people eating, maybe for him to do more of an ambient set. So that's what he ended up doing, and it was awesome. It was totally cool. But he had like kind of kind of restrictions as far as like playing to that audience. There was a lot of older people there eating dinner, and there was people all around. So we couldn't go full bore or play the heavier dance stuff for a while. But with this party, and each band played for about an hour or so, but this party it's real loose. It's just basically an informal little get together, and it's open to the public. We'll have a thing for donations, but it's going to be this Saturday too at 2 o'clock in Camden. And basically what that is, so like for instance, like Spencer doesn't have to worry about playing ambient dinner uh, cocktail music. He can just do whatever he wants to do this time. And I'm going to be doing also with Halsey, my great friend Halsey, who made his debut at Ada's show, and which was awesome and super cool. And then we'll be doing a quantum set. So it'll be like an outside. My friends have a deck. Daniel Richmond and Jillian Reed. They have a deck that's attached to their apartment. It's a big outdoor deck, so we'll be setting up out there, and been doing promotion for that show. And hopefully everything works as far as my equipment and all that good stuff. But I'm really looking forward to it. Originally, this was going to be the first show that Halsey and I were going to do together, like kind of his debut, and then that date got changed, pushed up to October. We were originally going to do it September, about a month ago, almost. But then we had to switch the date, move it up, and then the 80s gig came up, and then so that ended up being our first show together, and it was a blast. And we're gonna probably do hopefully some more shows at Ada's. They seem pretty happy with how everything went, so we're gonna set up some more shows there, possibly this week. So I'm excited about that. Maybe keep it going. Try to make it into something that's maybe a bi-monthly thing, or just keep that energy going, because there's like 4 or 5 groups now that I'm aware of that do similar music, and there's like a little pool or a little bit of a scene of these electronic artists that I suddenly know, friends that I know, and people I've just met. So it's wicked cool. So there's like options now. So, but if you're around in the Camden area, this Saturday, October 1st. Hopefully it's not too cold. We're gonna start the show around 2. Um, and yeah, it's a free show, so come by, and it'll be a afternoon's worth of just electronic music. So come hang out and it'll be fun, good time. So this movie here, the House on Sorority Row. This came out in 1982, and this again is a movie I know I saw when I was a kid, and I just bought this. The packaging is just super cool. It's got this great slipcover, and the artwork is phenomenal. Super cool. And this came out, like I said, 1982, and this is like a great. I'm a huge fan, obviously, of horror. Like that's my favorite genre, science fiction horror, particularly in the realm of like 60s, 70s, 80s exploitation area, and and then also the European scene too during that time, the giallo films, and I just picked up another Lucio Fulci movie that I'm excited to watch. So, but that's my favorite period. And again, I had seen this movie probably once or twice. I remember, it definitely. I watched it again the other day for the first time, and I was like, oh, okay. Definitely saw this, but it was years ago. And it came out in 1982. It was directed by Mark Rossman, and it stars um, Kate McNeil, Janice Ward, and Jodie Draghi. And it's like, I don't know. I mean, like slasher films. I'm so into the whole slasher horror exploitation thing. Like it's kind of my favorite. This is kind of like a high end version of that, if there is such a thing. It came out kind of at the tail end, like of the height of the whole slasher film, and there's a really amazing. The special features on here are just like off the charts. Like there's literally 3.5 hours of special features on here about the making of this film, and there's a really awesome interview with the director, um, Mark Rossman. It's it's super cool, and they have interviews with all of the cast, and it's pretty amazing the the careers that a lot of these people have had. The really cool thing about Mark Rossman is he talked about, like, this was his first full length feature as a director, and he went on. This was like the only kind of horror movie he's ever done. He went on to do like more like typical Hollywood love story films and even a lot of TV movies. He did a lot of movies for like the Lifetime Network, which is really weird. But this was the only film he did that was like labeled that was like a slasher film. But it's pretty awesome. Like the music is pretty amazing. The um, the atmosphere is incredible. The kills are really great. It's got this real interesting suspense element. And the thing that was really cool watching the Mark Rossman interview was when he was younger, when he was a developing filmmaker, he was in a film, he was going to film school, and he got this internship, and he was able to start working with um, Brian De Palma, who, if you don't know who Brian De Palma is, like he's in his heyday, he was like regarded as one of the most um, world renowned, most well respected directors. I mean, he directed like Carrie. He did Dress to Kill, which is an amazing movie. Body Double, which is an amazing movie. Scarface, amazing. Um, Tons of great movies. My two favorite Brian De Palma films are probably Body Double and Dress to Kill. Just amazing movies. Great like horror kind of suspense, horror suspense films, but they're kind of creepy and they just have this great atmosphere to them. And they're just amazing movies. I'll eventually do reviews on those films for the YouTube channel. But Brian De Palma really, he really modeled a lot of his stuff in a lot of ways too during that time when Brian De Palma's still alive, but he's not as prolific. But and his career kind of went in a different direction in his later part and later in his life. But during the 70s, 80s, and early 90s, he was really, particularly in the 80s, he was really regarded as like one of the top directors in Hollywood and an amazing filmmaker. And but he was also had a real huge influence from Hitchcock, and in a lot of ways, by certain people that loved him and loved his films, his peers, they regarded him almost as like a modern Hitchcock, and he took a lot of the whole like the way Hitchcock would kind of create these stories and create this level of suspense. And Brian De Palma kind of took that thing and kind of modernized it and created his own thing within that. And so Mark Rossman studied with Brian De Palma, and it was funny because after I watched this movie, The House of Sorority Row, actually as I was watching it, I got the sense that it had this really interesting atmosphere that kind of reminded me of those classic films like Dress to Kill or Body Double. Probably the two best, at least in my book, the two best movies that Brian De Palma made. Right at his like at the height of his power, and it kind of reminded me of those films. And I was like, it has that. Even though it's like like an exploitation movie, it's super uber low budget, and it's got this real cheesy factor to it. But it's also like beautifully shot. It's got this level of suspense, the and the reveal of who the killer is kind of almost reminded me of Dress to Kill, which is also a movie about a serial killer, and it's super creepy. But it kind of reminded me of Brian De Palma in a lot of ways, and also to a degree Hitchcock. So it was pretty wild when I watched the interview. I was like, no, no way. Okay, so he actually studied. He actually studied with him, and it was super, super interesting. So it kind of made sense after I watched the film. But again, the DVD, the Blu-ray, the quality of it is amazing, and it has hours. It's got so many hours. I'm almost the last 2 days, last 2 nights. I've been just watching the special features on it. Like it's just great. It's got all of these great interviews with a lot of the actresses, and particularly the Ellen Davidson and Catherine McNeil, the two actresses in the film. Ellen Davidson, in particular, I believe, really interesting interviews. She went on to become like a pretty big Hollywood star. She ended up working with Brad Pitt. She worked with Steve Martin. All kinds of people, and she didn't really do too many other horror films. She did a few after that, but she pretty much became a full on Hollywood actress. And then she eventually got out of film and she became um, a writer, and she has a bunch of books, and super cool, super cool. And the 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 film score for this film is the movie score for this film is just incredible. Um, it's and again it's very reminiscent of like Bernard Herrmann. The and it really has that Hitchcockian kind of vibe to it. And I'm just trying to find. I forgot the name of the composer because that's very important. Um, but it really had that kind of aesthetic to it. Um, and again, this was a film I remember seeing maybe once or twice when I was a kid, and so it was just great. But I got this on a whim. Like the packaging is just so amazing. But I do remember when I first saw it in the store the other day, I was like, I think I did see this. But it's great. It's got like the slip cover is awesome. It's made to look like they do that now too, which is so funny. They have these intentional. They intentionally make it look like it's a VHS box. It's got the be kind rewind thing on the top, and it's got the sticker, and it's just great, super great. But classic '80s, and it's a really great suspense. Uh, it's got this high level of suspense to it, and great atmosphere. Um, Super cool movie. Yeah, and so the movie was composed by Richard Band. Richard Band's a pretty amazing guy. There's an awesome interview with him on it, and he also did the Reanimator. He also did the music for that, which is one of the most iconic horror films of all time. Stuart Gordon, and which I didn't know after watching this interview with him, with Richard Band. He worked a lot with Stuart Gordon, he was one of the greatest, one of my all time favorite directors. He did a lot of Lovecraftian movies. He did Dagon. He did the Reanimator movies, The Pit and the Pendulum. But he also composed all the music for all of those films, and it was pretty amazing. And he was mostly, and he's still active, but his thing is mostly using orchestral live instrumentation. He doesn't really use synths and stuff. He has this funny thing of where he said that he tries to use more orchestral things because he feels if you're using all of these synths, particularly in the early days, it would give everything this really dated quality. So he tried to work with using orchestras so it would have this timeless quality. I thought that was kind of interesting. But yeah, The House of Sorority Row, killer movie. I mean, literally. Great story, great cast, cheesy at times, but it's wonderful. Some really great kills, great ending, great atmosphere. There's some creepy moments, beautifully shot. The music is really really cool. It's got the total '80s cheese factor to it, and the special features are just one of the best Blu-rays I have as far as learning about how this great movie was made. Like it's got about 3 hours and real in depth interviews, and even when they have these segments where they interview the cast and the people who made the film, the woman who does the interviewing is great. She asks some really interesting kind of intelligent questions, things that you don't normally hear somebody ask. So tremendous movie. So this is a great movie. So highly recommend it. So if you get a chance, The House of Sorority Row, go definitely check this movie out. It's classic slasher horror exploitation movies from the '80s. So this is Jason Dean. So thanks again, and we will see you again. If you get a chance, like and subscribe to my page. Thank you. Have a great day.